All right, today we are diving deep into the story of one of the most controversial figures in all of American history, John Brown. And we're going to do it by looking at accounts written back in 1859, the very year he set the country on fire. This is the story of the man who arguably lit the fuse of the Civil War.
So, picture this. It's the night of October 16, 1859. A small group of armed men storms the federal armory at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. They snatch the arsenal, they take hostages, and suddenly, the entire nation is thrown into a state of shock. It was so intense that even people writing about it as it happened knew this was going to change everything.
And the man leading this whole operation, Captain John Brown. His plan was brutally simple and honestly pretty audacious. Step 1, take the arsenal with its thousands of guns. Step 2, hand those guns over to the local enslaved population. And Step 3, light the match on a massive slave rebellion that would, he hoped, just burn the institution of slavery to the ground.
Now the raid itself, well, it failed. Brown was captured in less than 2 days, but his actions left a huge, looming question hanging over the entire country. Who was this guy? Was he a total madman, a terrorist, or was he some kind of righteous martyr? To even begin to answer that, we have to go back and look at the man before the mission.
So let's hit rewind, because before John Brown was the militant abolitionist at Harpers Ferry, he lived a totally different life. And honestly, it's a life that makes his final act that much more jarring. He was a businessman, a farmer, and a father to a whole bunch of kids.
The contrast is just wild. On the one hand, you've got this warrior leading a bloody raid. But for years before that, in places like Ohio and Springfield, Massachusetts, people knew him as this really honest, if kinda unlucky businessman. One account from the time even calls him a quiet, modest man of unswerving integrity. It just doesn't seem to line up, does it?
And his business career was just one tough break after another. He tried building warehouses in Ohio, but then the financial crash of 1837 completely wiped him out. So he tries again, this time in the wool industry in Massachusetts. But a group of manufacturers basically ganged up and drove him out of business, leaving him broke. Again. By 1850, it seems like he just had it. He packs up his family and moves to this super remote farm in upstate New York, just to get a fresh start.
And get this, he wasn't just some hobby farmer. He was actually great at it. His prize-winning Devon cattle were the talk of the local county fair. People were seriously impressed. He was a respected breeder, a man of the land. It's just so hard to square that image with the guy who just 9 years later would be at the center of a violent insurrection.
So, what happened? What was the switch that flipped? What could possibly turn this prize-winning cattle farmer into a man convinced that the only way to wash away the sin of slavery was with blood? Well, the answer to that is out west.
So, in the mid-1850s, the Kansas Territory basically became a war zone. There was this new law that said the settlers themselves got to vote on whether Kansas would be a free state or a slave state. And just like that, pro-slavery and anti-slavery fighters flooded into the region. It was in this violent, chaotic mess, which came to be known as Bleeding Kansas, that the old John Brown, the farmer, was burned away, and John Brown, the warrior, was born.
He had sons who'd already moved to Kansas, so in 1855, he followed them out there to join the fight for a free state. But things got personal fast. First, pro-slavery forces ransacked the anti-slavery town of Lawrence. The violence just kept escalating. And then, the ultimate tragedy. In Brown's own words, pro-slavery scouts shot my son dead in the road. That loss, on top of all the fighting, it changed him completely.
I mean, listen to this quote from a biographer at the time. It just captures that transformation perfectly. It says, "The iron of personal wrong had been driven into his soul and maddened him. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was a personal vendetta. That grief and that rage focused him on one single idea, a lifelong, never-ending war on slavery."
And his camp of guerrilla fighters out in Kansas really reflected this new person he'd become. He was described as a Puritan warrior, almost like he'd stepped out of the 17th century. He was deeply, deeply religious, held prayer services twice a day, but his faith was a militant one. You know the saying, "Trust in God but keep your powder dry"? That was John Brown. When someone warned him that pro-slavery forces wanted his scalp, he just calmly replied, "Sir, the angel of the Lord will camp round about me." So this was the man who emerged from the fires of Bleeding Kansas. He wasn't just a man fighting for a cause anymore. He saw himself as an instrument of God's justice. And it was that absolute conviction, that righteous fury, that led him all the way from the plains of Kansas back east to that little engine house at Harpers Ferry.
So after the raid failed, a wounded but completely defiant John Brown was captured and put on trial for his life. You can just imagine, the entire country was holding its breath. Everyone knew this trial was about way more than just one man.
Even though he was badly wounded during his capture, they rushed him to Charlestown to stand trial. He was often so weak he had to be carried into the courtroom on a stretcher. But his spirit, oh, that was anything but broken. He was ready to face whatever they threw at him. And they threw the book at him. The charges were as serious as it gets: treason against Virginia, conspiring with slaves to start an insurrection, and first-degree murder. Any one of those charges was a death sentence. But when the court gave him a chance to speak before sentencing, he didn't beg for his life. No way. Instead, he gave this incredible speech that basically became a rallying cry for the abolitionist movement. He argued that what he did wasn't a crime at all. It was his moral duty. He said interfering on behalf of the despised poor, meaning the slaves, wasn't wrong. It was absolutely right.
And then he delivered the knockout punch. He completely reframed his own execution as a noble sacrifice. He basically said, look, if you think my death will help the cause of justice, if my blood needs to be added to the blood of millions of slaves, then I'm ready. I say, let it be done. I mean, wow. With those words, he went from being a failed rebel to a powerful martyr in the eyes of many.
The verdict was never really in doubt: guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. But for John Brown, and for a nation that was careening towards civil war, the story was just getting started. His execution would end up being just as explosive as his raid.
On the morning of December 2, 1859, John Brown was led out to the gallows. The authorities had brought in a massive number of soldiers because they were terrified someone might try to rescue him. But Brown himself, he was completely calm.
This part is just incredible. As he's literally sitting on his own coffin in the back of a wagon, he's not praying frantically or shouting. He just looks around at the Virginia countryside and says, "This is a beautiful country. I never had the pleasure of seeing it before." It just shows this unbelievable composure right at the very end.
He truly saw his own death as a victory. In his last letter home, he called his execution a public murder, but said he was waiting for it with cheerfulness. He was totally convinced that what looked like a disaster would actually lead to a glorious success. He believed his death would do more to end slavery than his life ever could have. And you know what? In a lot of ways, he was absolutely right.
John Brown's body was laid in the grave, but that famous song got it right. His soul went marching on, right onto the battlefields of the Civil War. His actions basically forced the country to confront a moral question it had been avoiding for decades. So what do we make of him? Was he a hero who gave his life for the oppressed, or a dangerous fanatic who embraced violence and murder? That's the question people started asking the second he was executed, and it's a question we're still debating today.